Jasmine Washington stands defiantly on the tarmac while 6 massive airliners sit idle behind her. The CEO of Skymark Airlines nervously approaches with security. She simply asks, "Does my Harvard law degree make my skin any lighter?" Entire airport falls silent as cameras flash. Before I continue this incredible story of courage and justice, tell me where you're watching from today. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. Now let me take you back to where it all began, when a brilliant attorney's routine business trip turned into a nationwide movement. Jasmine Washington checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her corner office at Anderson & Mitchell, adjusting her tailored navy blazer. At 34, she had just become the youngest partner in the prestigious firm's history, and only the 3rd Black woman to achieve the title in its 70-year existence. The weight of this accomplishment wasn't lost on her, but today her mind was focused on the Mercer Pharmaceuticals case. $320 million, she whispered, still hardly believing the settlement figure she'd secured against the pharmaceutical giant for their negligent testing protocols. The case had made national headlines, cemented her reputation as a legal powerhouse, and fast-tracked her partnership. But more importantly, it had secured compensation for thousands of victims who might otherwise have been forgotten. Her office phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. "Jasmine, your car is waiting downstairs," her assistant Trey announced. "And your mother called again. She said to remind you about Sunday dinner, partner or not." Jasmine smiled. No matter how high she climbed, Elaine Washington would always keep her grounded. "Tell the driver I'll be down in 5. And send my mom flowers with a note saying I wouldn't miss her sweet potato pie for anything in the world." Growing up in East Baltimore, Jasmine had watched her mother work double shifts as a hospital nurse to keep their small family afloat after her father's death. Elaine had instilled in her daughter an unwavering belief that education was the path forward. When Jasmine won a full scholarship to Howard University, Elaine had cried for hours, both from pride and relief. 4 years later, Jasmine graduated at the top of her class and was accepted to Harvard Law, becoming the first person in her family to attend graduate school. Jasmine gathered the presentation materials for her meeting in San Francisco. The client, a tech company facing intellectual property challenges, needed her in person for negotiations starting tomorrow afternoon. As she organized her leather portfolio, she mentally reviewed her itinerary. She had booked a first-class seat on Skymark Airlines using the platinum frequent flyer status she had earned through countless cross-country flights. The seat would allow her space to work and arrive rested. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "So proud of you, baby girl, but don't forget to breathe sometimes." Jasmine felt a familiar pang of guilt. She couldn't remember the last time she had taken a real vacation. Every achievement seemed to immediately birth new expectations, new responsibilities. As a Black woman, she had internalized the lesson early: be twice as good to get half as far. And even now, with her name on the firm's letterhead, the pressure never eased. Just last week, a client had mistaken her for an assistant during a video conference, asking when the actual attorney would join the call. Last month, a security guard had stopped her from entering the executive floor of her own building despite her clearly visible ID badge. These incidents weren't new, but they stung each time. Back at her desk, Jasmine confirmed her hotel reservation and flight details one more time. Her reputation for meticulous preparation was well earned. Nothing in her life had come without careful planning and flawless execution. Tomorrow's flight would depart at 7:15 a.m., arriving in San Francisco by 10:30 a.m. local time, giving her ample opportunity to prepare before her 2:00 p.m. meeting. That night in her downtown apartment, Jasmine carefully packed her Burberry suit, selected her presentation materials, and reviewed the case files one final time. Everything was perfect. She set 2 alarms and went to sleep unaware that her carefully orchestrated life was about to veer dramatically off course. The gleaming interior of Reagan National Airport was already bustling at 5:45 a.m. when Jasmine arrived, her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her. She navigated security with practiced efficiency, TSA pre-check, allowing her to bypass the growing lines. In her tailored pantsuit and with her confidence, she moved through the airport like she belonged in every exclusive space because she did. The entrance to Skymark's first-class lounge featured sleek glass doors emblazoned with the airline's signature blue logo. Inside the space was a sanctuary of soft lighting, plush seating, and complimentary amenities. As Jasmine handed her boarding pass and ID to the attendant, she registered the subtle shift in the woman's expression, that momentary flicker of surprise she had grown accustomed to identifying. "Good morning. Welcome to Skymark's Diamond Lounge," the attendant said, her professional smile returning as she scanned Jasmine's credentials. Jasmine nodded her thanks and entered, walking past a display of champagne and fresh fruit toward a quiet corner seat. The lounge was about half full, primarily with white men in business attire. A few glanced up as she passed, their expressions ranging from indifference to barely concealed surprise. One older gentleman in an expensive suit did a double take, then returned to his newspaper. She had just settled in with a cup of coffee and her tablet when a flight attendant approached. His name tag read Gregory Reynolds, and his pressed uniform suggested seniority. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" he asked. Jasmine retrieved it from her purse and handed it over. Reynolds studied it longer than necessary, his eyes flicking between the document and her face. "You're in the first-class lounge," he noted, as if she might have wandered in accidentally. "Yes, I'm aware," Jasmine replied evenly. "As you can see, I'm booked in first class and have platinum status with Skymark." Reynolds frowned slightly. This status was just upgraded recently. "No, I've maintained platinum status for 3 years now." Jasmine corrected him, keeping her tone professional despite the unnecessary questioning. "I see. Well, enjoy your stay in the lounge, Miss Washington. Boarding for San Francisco will begin in approximately 40 minutes. He handed back her boarding pass with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. As he walked away, Jasmine took a slow sip of her coffee, refusing to let the interaction disrupt her morning. She had long ago perfected the art of compartmentalizing these moments, filing them away to maintain her focus on what mattered. When the boarding announcement came, Jasmine gathered her belongings and proceeded to the gate. To her surprise, Gregory Reynolds was now positioned at the boarding desk, checking passengers' tickets before they entered the jetway. When she reached the front of the priority boarding line, she handed him her boarding pass. Reynolds scanned it, then frowned at his computer screen. "I'm afraid there's been a computer error with your booking, Miss Washington." "What kind of error?" Jasmine asked, already sensing what was coming. "Your first-class seat has been reassigned. It appears the flight was overbooked." Jasmine glanced past him at the monitor, which clearly showed 2 open seats remaining in first class. "I confirmed this reservation yesterday. As a platinum member, I should be the last person to be downgraded in an overbooking situation, according to Skymark's own policy." As they were speaking, a white man in his 50s approached the desk from behind Jasmine. Reynolds immediately brightened. "Mr. Pearson, welcome back, sir. We have you all set in your usual spot. Would you like to board now?" Pearson, dressed in a golf shirt and expensive chinos, nodded and was promptly escorted around Jasmine to the jetway entrance. "I'd like to speak with a supervisor," Jasmine said firmly. "I'm afraid there are no supervisors available at the moment. The best I can offer is an economy seat 32E near the back." "It's an aisle," Reynolds replied, already printing the new boarding pass. "It's airline policy in these situations. Nothing personal." Jasmine accepted the new boarding pass without taking her eyes off Reynolds. "I'll need documentation of this change, including the reason for the downgrade and confirmation of the refund for the fare difference. You can request that information from customer service after your flight," Reynolds replied dismissively, already looking past her to the next passenger. Jasmine made her way down the jetway, mind racing, but expression calm. This was not the first time she had been singled out, and her legal training had taught her to document everything. As she boarded the aircraft, she noted the timestamp and took a discreet photo of the first-class cabin with her phone clearly showing empty seats. Squeezing into the cramped economy seat beside the bathroom, Jasmine sent a quick text to her assistant to reschedule her morning upon arrival, anticipating the delay this situation would cause. Then she began to observe and document. During the boarding process, Jasmine noticed 2 other black passengers being redirected from the first-class line to economy. One, an older man in a business suit, protested briefly before resignedly making his way toward the back of the plane. The other, a young woman in medical scrubs, seemed too tired to argue. Meanwhile, several white passengers who arrived after Jasmine were welcomed into the first-class cabin with warm smiles from Reynolds. A flight attendant named Sarah passed through the aisle checking that seatbelts were fastened. Jasmine politely stopped her. "Excuse me, I was downgraded from first class at the gate without explanation. Could you tell me if the flight is actually overbooked?" Sarah checked her tablet, frowning slightly. "No, we're actually 3 seats under capacity in total, with 2 open in first class." "Were you told the flight was full?" "Yes, by the gate agent, Mr. Reynolds." "That's odd. Let me check something when I get back up front." Sarah offered, seeming genuinely concerned. A few minutes later, as the cabin doors were about to close, Jasmine overheard Reynolds speaking with another crew member near the galley. "3 of them trying to sit up front today. Can you imagine? Next thing you know, they'll all expect upgrades. I had to fix it quality control, you know what I mean." The other crew member looked uncomfortable, but didn't respond. From across the aisle, a white woman in her early 40s caught Jasmine's eye. She had clearly overheard the same comment. "That's disgusting," the woman said quietly to Jasmine. "I'm Rachel Coleman. If you need a witness to what he just said, I'd be happy to provide my contact information." Jasmine thanked her and added Rachel's details to her growing documentation. The cabin door closed and the aircraft pushed back from the gate. As they taxied toward the runway, the plane suddenly stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay due to air traffic control. We should be underway shortly. Flight attendants, please remain seated." The delay stretched from 5 minutes to 15. Jasmine used the time to make a discreet phone call to her colleague Devin Williams, who specialized in discrimination cases. "Devin, it's Jasmine. I'm going to need your expertise on what appears to be a systematic case of discrimination by Skymark Airlines." "Yes, right now. I'm in the middle of it." As the plane sat motionless on the tarmac, Jasmine Washington faced the choice that confronted her countless times throughout her career. Accept the injustice silently, or stand firm and face the consequences. Her finger hovered over the call button above her seat. Her mind flashed back to a conversation she'd had 6 months ago with Judge Eleanor Robinson, a mentor who had broken racial barriers in the federal judiciary. They had been having lunch in the courthouse cafeteria when Eleanor leaned forward and said something Jasmine never forgot. "The hardest wisdom to learn in our position is when to fight and when to let it go." Eleanor had said, stirring her tea, "Not every battle is worth the toll it takes on you. But the ones that are the ones that might clear the path for others, those you fight with everything you've got." Jasmine had nodded, absorbing the advice from a woman who had faced down death threats to become the first black female federal judge in her district. How do you know which is which? Eleanor's eyes had crinkled at the corners. When the injustice isn't just happening to you, when you see it's systematic affecting your community, that's when you plant your feet and refuse to move. Sitting in seat 32, Jasmine knew this was one of those moments. This wasn't about a seat upgrade. It was about dignity, about the casual ease with which Reynolds had exercised his prejudice about the routine nature of the discrimination that suggested company-wide tolerance if not policy. She pressed the call button. While waiting for a flight attendant, she opened her phone's notes app and began documenting every detail, times, names, statements, verbatim. Her legal training kicked in automatically. She'd need evidence beyond her word witnesses, documentation of policy violations, pattern recognition. Sarah, the flight attendant who had seemed sympathetic earlier, responded to her call. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I'd like to speak with the captain regarding a serious matter of discrimination that occurred during boarding," Jasmine stated calmly but firmly. Sarah looked uncertain. "The captain is quite busy with the delay." "I understand. But under Federal Aviation Regulation 121.533, the captain is the final authority responsible for the safety of passengers, which includes ensuring they're treated with dignity and without discrimination by crew members. I'm formally requesting to speak with them about a situation that violates multiple federal regulations and company policies." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at Jasmine's precise knowledge of FAA regulations. "Let me see what I can do." As Sarah made her way to the cockpit, Jasmine continued gathering information. She struck up conversations with nearby passengers, discreetly asking if they'd witnessed the boarding process or overheard Reynolds' comments. 3 passengers provided their contact information as potential witnesses. Looking around the economy cabin, Jasmine noticed a pattern. Despite Skymark's advertisements featuring diverse passengers, the actual first-class cabin she had glimpsed was almost exclusively white, while economy held most of the flight's passengers of color. This wasn't coincidence. It was a visual representation of sorting. 20 minutes into the delay, Sarah returned. "The captain says he can't leave the cockpit during the delay, but he'll speak with you after we reach cruising altitude." "I appreciate that, but I need to address this before takeoff," Jasmine replied. "Could you please inform him that I'm prepared to file immediate complaints with the FAA Department of Transportation and NAACP Legal Defense Fund regarding discriminatory practices if this matter isn't addressed now?" The statement was calm but carried unmistakable weight. Sarah's professional demeanor slipped momentarily before she nodded and returned to the cockpit. Across the aisle, Rachel Coleman leaned over. "I'm a journalist with the Washington Post," she said quietly. "Travel section, nothing fancy, but I've been flying Skymark bi-weekly for 3 years, and what happened to you isn't isolated. I've seen this gate agent do this before." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Would you be willing to go on record about that?" Rachel nodded. "Absolutely. It's past time someone called this out." 5 minutes later, a distinguished man in his 50s with captain's stripes on his shoulders appeared in the economy cabin. Captain Franklin Pierce looked tired and slightly annoyed as he approached Jasmine's row. "Miss Washington, I understand you wanted to speak with me. We're trying to get this aircraft moving, so I'd appreciate if we could keep this brief." Jasmine stood to face him at eye level. "I understand the time pressure, Captain Pierce, and I appreciate you coming back here. I want to make you aware of a serious situation that occurred during boarding that violates federal anti-discrimination laws and likely your airline's stated policies as well." She proceeded to outline the events concisely and precisely, presenting her evidence, the documentation of empty first-class seats. Despite the claimed overbooking, Reynolds' comments overheard by multiple witnesses, and the pattern of black passengers being systematically downgraded. "This isn't a customer service complaint about comfort, Captain. This appears to be a pattern of racial discrimination implemented by your gate agent and potentially condoned by Skymark's practices. As captain and final authority on this aircraft, you should be aware that continuing this flight without addressing this situation could implicate you in these violations." Captain Pierce shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Washington, while I sympathize with your situation, passenger seating is handled by gate agents and is not my department. I'd be happy to ensure this is reported to customer relations." "I'm recording this conversation," Captain Pierce. Jasmine interjected calmly, holding up her phone. "Single-party consent is legal in this state. I want to be clear, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to address a legal violation occurring under your authority before this aircraft departs." The mention of recording changed the captain's demeanor instantly. Around them, other passengers had fallen silent watching the exchange. "I'll need to speak with the gate agent about this," Captain Pierce said stiffly. "I think that would be appropriate," Jasmine agreed. As the captain made his way to the front of the plane, Reynolds appeared in the aisle, his face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed at Jasmine. "You're delaying an entire flight over a seating assignment." "No, Mr. Reynolds. I'm addressing racial discrimination implemented by a representative of this airline. There's a significant difference." Reynolds' face darkened. "If you continue disrupting this flight, I'll have security remove you from the aircraft." "I'm not disrupting anything," Jasmine replied evenly. "I'm exercising my legal right to address discrimination. If you'd like to have me removed, you'll need to provide written documentation of the reason, which I'm sure my firm's litigation department would find fascinating." The standoff was interrupted by Captain Pierce's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an administrative issue that requires resolution, we'll be returning to the gate. We apologize for the inconvenience and expect only a short delay." Reynolds' expression shifted from anger to disbelief as the aircraft began slowly taxiing back toward the terminal. "You can't do this," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I didn't," Jasmine replied quietly. "You did. I'm just refusing to accept it." The aircraft doors opened with a pressurized hiss as Skymark Flight 1372 returned to Gate C-26. Captain Franklin Pierce stood at the front of the first-class cabin, his face a careful mask of professionalism that couldn't quite hide his discomfort. Gregory Reynolds hovered beside him, whispering urgently, while occasionally shooting glares down the aisle toward Jasmine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Pierce announced, "we apologize for the delay. We're addressing an administrative issue and should be on our way shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Jasmine remained perfectly still in her economy seat, her lawyer's training serving her well as she maintained her composure despite the stares of curious passengers. She knew her next moves would be critical. This wasn't just about her seat anymore. It was about forcing accountability from a system designed to avoid it. Beside her, Rachel Coleman was discreetly taking notes. "They're hoping you'll back down now that you've made your point," she whispered. "Most people would." "I'm not most people," Jasmine replied quietly. A flight attendant approached not Sarah, but an older woman whose name tag read Patricia. Her expression was tight with artificial pleasantness. "Miss Washington, the captain would like to speak with you privately at the front of the aircraft." Jasmine shook her head slightly. "I'm happy to speak with Captain Pierce, but any discussion should happen right here where other passengers who witnessed the discriminatory treatment can observe." Patricia's smile thinned further. "That's not standard protocol. Neither is returning an aircraft to the gate, because a gate agent systematically downgraded black passengers from their rightfully purchased seats." Jasmine interrupted smoothly. "If the captain wishes to discuss this situation, he can do so here." Patricia hesitated, then retreated to the front of the aircraft. Moments later, Captain Pierce himself made his way down the narrow aisle, stopping beside Jasmine's row. "Miss Washington, I understand your concerns, but we need to resolve this quickly. I've spoken with Mr. Reynolds, who assures me there was simply a computer error with the seating assignments. A computer error that affected 3 black passengers with confirmed first-class seats, while allowing white passengers who arrived after us to be seated in first class without issue." Jasmine asked her voice level, but carrying enough for nearby rows to hear clearly. "That would be a very specific type of computer error, Captain Pierce. Do you think Jasmine is right to stand her ground in such a public way? Comment 1 if you believe she's justified in refusing to discuss this privately, or 2 if you think she should have handled it more discreetly. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about everyday people taking extraordinary stands against injustice. Now, how would you react if you were witnessing this confrontation on your flight? Would you speak up like Rachel or stay silent? The tension on this aircraft is about to reach new heights as Jasmine refuses to back down. Captain Pierce glanced uncomfortably at the interested faces of nearby passengers. "Miss Washington, I can offer you a first-class seat on this flight as a courtesy." "This isn't about my seat," Captain Jasmine interrupted. "This is about a pattern of discrimination that I witnessed affecting multiple passengers. I'm not interested in preferential treatment that leaves the underlying problem unaddressed." By now, Reynolds had appeared behind the captain, his face flushed. "This is ridiculous. We have a plane full of passengers who are being delayed because of unfounded accusations." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Reynolds, I heard you explicitly state, and I quote, 3 of them trying to sit up front today. Can you imagine? Next thing you know, they'll all expect upgrades. I had to fix it quality control. You know what I mean? Would you like to clarify what you meant by them and what needed fixing?" The color drained from Reynolds' face. Several passengers gasped audibly. "I never said," he began. "I heard it too," Rachel Coleman interjected, word for word exactly as Miss Washington quoted. From 2 rows behind, an elderly black man in a business suit spoke up. "I was also downgraded from first class at the gate by this gentleman despite having confirmed my seat yesterday." Captain Pierce's expression hardened as he turned to Reynolds. "We need to continue this discussion off the aircraft. I have documentation of everything Jasmine said," holding up her phone, "including the timestamps of my original booking, my check-in, the downgrade, the empty first-class seats, and Mr. Reynolds' statements. I've already forwarded this information to my law firm's partners and to the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division." The captain's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Miss Washington, what exactly are you looking to accomplish here?" "Accountability and transparency," she replied, without hesitation. "I want formal acknowledgement of the discriminatory treatment, reinstatement of all downgraded passengers to their rightful seats, disciplinary action for Mr. Reynolds, and documentation of Skymark's plan to prevent such incidents in the future." Reynolds stepped forward aggressively. "This is extortion. If you don't return to your seat and allow this flight to depart, we'll have you removed and placed on our no-fly list for disrupting operations." Jasmine didn't flinch. That would be retaliation against a civil rights complaint, which would compound Skymark's legal exposure significantly. "Are you making that threat in your official capacity as a Skymark employee, Mr. Reynolds?" The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to have quieted, as if the plane itself was holding its breath. Captain Pierce made a decision. "Mr. Reynolds, please return to the terminal. Miss Washington, I'm going to contact our regional director to address this situation properly." "I'm not leaving this aircraft," Reynolds protested. "That wasn't a request," Captain Pierce said firmly. "Deplane immediately or I'll have security escort you off." As Reynolds stormed off the aircraft, Captain Pierce turned back to Jasmine. "I apologize for the situation, Miss Washington. Please understand that his views don't represent Skymark Airlines. His actions occurred in his capacity as a Skymark employee captain. The airline bears responsibility for the conduct of its staff," Jasmine replied. "I'll need documentation of this incident before this flight departs." The captain nodded stiffly. "I'll have our ground staff prepare an incident report. In the meantime, would you and the other affected passengers please gather your belongings? We'll resettle you in your original first-class seats." Jasmine stood, gathering her carry-on. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your taking this matter seriously." As she moved toward the front of the aircraft, followed by the elderly businessman and another young black woman who had been quietly observing the confrontation, a smattering of applause broke out from several passengers. The battle wasn't over, but the first skirmish had been won. Jasmine knew from experience that corporations rarely addressed systemic problems without significant pressure. As she settled into her rightful first-class seat, she pulled out her phone and sent a message to Devin Williams. "Discrimination incident in progress with Skymark. I need you to prepare for potential class action. This goes deeper than one flight. Outside the aircraft window, she could see Reynolds gesturing angrily to a group of airline staff gathering at the gate. The delay was about to get much longer. 30 minutes after returning to the gate, Skymark Flight 1372 remained stationary. The mood in the first-class cabin was tense as passengers checked watches and refreshed email on their phones. Jasmine sat calmly in seat 2C, her original assignment reviewing the hastily prepared incident report that a flustered gate agent had brought aboard. The document was vague, attributing the seating changes to operational necessities without mentioning discrimination. "This is inadequate," she informed Captain Pierce, who had stopped by her seat. "There's no acknowledgement of the actual issue, and it's clearly designed to shield the airline from liability rather than address what occurred." Pierce's face tightened. "Miss Washington, we've returned you to your seat, removed Mr. Reynolds from the flight, and documented the incident. We need to get this aircraft moving." "I understand the time pressure, Captain, but a deliberately misleading incident report only compounds the problem." Jasmine's voice remained calm but firm. "I can't in good conscience sign this." Through the aircraft windows, an increasing commotion was visible in the terminal. A man in an expensive suit had arrived at the gate, surrounded by several airline staff members. He was gesturing emphatically toward the plane. "That's Derek Thompson," the airport manager Rachel Coleman murmured, leaning across the aisle toward Jasmine. "Skymark must be escalating this." Captain Pierce was called to the front of the aircraft, where he engaged in an intense conversation with the lead flight attendant. Moments later, he returned to Jasmine. "Mr. Thompson would like to speak with you in the terminal to resolve this matter," he said. Jasmine assessed the situation quickly. "I'm happy to speak with him, but I'll need my personal items to remain on board my seat to remain assigned to me, and a guarantee that the aircraft won't depart during our discussion." The captain nodded stiffly. "Agreed." As Jasmine made her way through the jetway into the terminal, she found herself facing Derek Thompson, a silver-haired executive whose forced smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Washington, I'm Derek Thompson, Reagan National Airport Skymark Operations Manager. I understand there's been some confusion with your seating assignment today." "There was no confusion, Mr. Thompson," Jasmine replied evenly. "There was deliberate discrimination, which I documented extensively." Thompson's smile tightened. "I assure you, Skymark Airlines takes these allegations very seriously. We'd like to offer you our sincere apologies, along with vouchers for 2 free first-class tickets to any domestic destination." He extended an envelope toward her, which Jasmine made no move to accept. "Mr. Thompson, this isn't about compensation for me personally. This is about a pattern of discrimination that affected multiple passengers and appears to be systemic within your airline." Thompson's professional veneer slipped slightly. "Miss Washington, we have a plane full of passengers who need to reach their destinations. What exactly are you looking for here?" "Accountability and real change," Jasmine replied. "I want a formal investigation into discriminatory practices at Skymark, particularly regarding seat assignments and upgrades, with public disclosure of the findings." Thompson shook his head. "That's not something I can authorize on the spot. The best I can do is escalate your concerns to our corporate headquarters while we get this flight underway." As they spoke, Jasmine noticed something unusual happening at nearby gates. Small groups of passengers were gathered around their phones and tablets, some pointing toward Jasmine and Thompson. At Gate C-24, a Skymark flight attendant was engaged in an animated conversation with her captain. "Mr. Thompson," Jasmine said, "I think you should be aware that this incident isn't contained anymore." She nodded toward a passenger who was clearly recording their conversation on his phone. Thompson's eyes widened slightly as he scanned the concourse, suddenly registering the attention their discussion was attracting. He lowered his voice. "Let's continue this conversation in my office." "I'm comfortable having this discussion right here," Jasmine replied. "Transparency is important when addressing civil rights violations." At that moment, a tall, distinguished black man in an impeccable suit approached them rapidly from the direction of the security checkpoint. "Derek, what the hell is going on? I just got calls from 3 different board members." The man's voice was controlled but intense. Thompson paled slightly. "Samuel I was just explaining to Miss Washington that we're addressing her concerns while trying to get Flight 1372 back on schedule." Samuel Wilson, as his Skymark ID badge identified him, turned to Jasmine with a measuring look. "Miss Washington, I'm Samuel Wilson, Regional Director for Skymark's Eastern Division. I understand there was an incident involving one of our gate agents." "It was more than an incident, Mr. Wilson. It was textbook discrimination," Jasmine responded. She concisely outlined what had transpired, including Reynolds' comments and the pattern of black passengers being downgraded. Wilson listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly grim. When she finished, he turned to Thompson. "Where is Reynolds now?" "In my office," Thompson replied. "He claims Miss Washington is exaggerating to get preferential treatment." Wilson's jaw tightened, and the other passengers who were downgraded. "They've been returned to their original seats," Thompson said quickly. But no formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no incident reports that accurately reflect what occurred, and apparently an attempt to buy silence with travel vouchers. Jasmine added. Wilson ran a hand over his face. "Miss Washington, I want to apologize personally for your experience today. This is not what Skymark stands for. With all due respect, Mr. Wilson, when your employees engage in discriminatory practices while performing their duties, that is precisely what your airline stands for, regardless of what your mission statement says." Wilson nodded slowly. "You're right. And you're not the first to raise these concerns." He turned to Thompson. "Derek, I want a full review of all passenger reassignments on Reynolds flights for the past 6 months with demographic breakdowns." Thompson looked stunned. "That would take weeks." "Then you'd better get started." Wilson cut him off. He turned back to Jasmine. "Miss Washington, I'd like to propose a more substantive resolution than vouchers. Would you be willing to discuss what meaningful accountability would look like from your perspective?" Before Jasmine could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of 3 more people, Captain Pierce, Rachel Coleman, and a young black woman Jasmine recognized as another passenger who had been downgraded. "Mr. Wilson," Captain Pierce began, "we have a situation developing. Several of our crew members across multiple flights are refusing to operate their aircraft until the discrimination complaint is formally addressed." Wilson's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "How many flights?" 3 so far, with reports coming in from 2 more gates," Pierce replied. "Crews are citing safety concerns related to corporate culture and discriminatory practices affecting operational decisions." Thompson looked panicked. "That's ridiculous. They can't just refuse to fly." "Actually, they can," Wilson corrected him. "FAA regulations allow crew members to decline duty if they have reasonable concern about safety or regulatory compliance." Rachel Coleman stepped forward. "And it's not just crew members. Passengers are organizing too." She held up her phone, displaying a social media feed where number Skymark discrimination was gaining traction. "I'm not the only journalist on these flights, and this story is spreading in real time." The young woman beside Rachel nodded. "My name is Tanya Marshall. I'm a social media manager for Equal Justice Initiative, and I was also downgraded today. Our organization has already been contacted by 7 different passengers offering testimonials about similar experiences on Skymark flights." Wilson processed this information with remarkable composure, though Jasmine noted the slight twitch in his jaw. He turned to her with newfound respect. "Miss Washington, I think we need to have a much more comprehensive conversation. Would you be willing to join me in our conference room? I promise this isn't an attempt to silence you, quite the opposite. I think we need your expertise to address this properly." Jasmine considered the offer. Wilson seemed genuinely committed to addressing the situation. but she was keenly aware that corporations often used private negotiations to contain public relations disasters. "I'm willing to discuss solutions, Mr. Wilson, but with conditions. I want Rachel Coleman and Tanya Marshall included in the conversation as witnesses, all agreements documented in writing, and a commitment to public disclosure of findings and remedial actions." Wilson nodded without hesitation. "Agreed. And I'd like to add that I've been pushing for a review of our seating algorithms and staff training for months. Perhaps this situation will finally provide the leverage needed to implement real change." As they walked toward the conference room, Jasmine received a text from Devin Williams. "Arrived at airport, bringing reinforcements from Civil Rights Division. Where are you?" She smiled slightly. The conversation with Wilson had just become exponentially more substantive. The Skymark conference room at Reagan National felt small, with 9 people crowded around the table. Jasmine sat flanked by Devin Williams and his associate Kira Chen, both still in business attire despite having rushed from court. Across from them, Samuel Wilson and Derek Thompson represented Skymark, alongside the airline's hastily summoned legal counsel Patricia Okonkwo. Rachel Coleman and Tanya Marshall completed one side of the table while Captain Pierce sat somewhat uncomfortably at the end. "Let's cut to the chase," Devin began, his deep voice filling the room. "We have documented evidence of discriminatory treatment by Skymark employee Gregory Reynolds, but our preliminary research suggests this is far from an isolated incident." Patricia Okonkwo raised a hand. "Before we continue, I want to be clear that Skymark categorically denies any systematic discrimination in its policies or procedures." Devin smiled thinly. "That's going to be a difficult position to maintain, Miss Okonkwo." He slid several printed pages across the table. "These are internal Skymark emails from the past 18 months. Provided by a former employee who reached out after seeing Miss Marshall's social media posts about today's incident." Wilson picked up the documents, his expression darkening as he read. "What am I looking at?" he asked quietly. "Evidence that Skymark has been implementing what they internally call passenger profile optimization, a euphemism for segregating passengers based on perceived status and appearance," Devin explained. "The algorithm that makes these determinations heavily weights factors that serve as proxies for race." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Those documents appear to be taken out of context." "Let me finish, Mr. Thompson," Devin interrupted firmly. "The most damning email is from your Vice President of Customer Experience, Jeffrey Harrington, explicitly instructing gate agents to use their discretion in overriding the system to maintain cabin atmosphere and customer comfort, language that has been used historically as cover for segregationist practices." Wilson put the papers down, his face a mask of controlled anger. "I've never seen these communications." "That's entirely possible," Jasmine acknowledged. "Discrimination often operates in layers with plausible deniability built in at each level. The question is, what will you do now that you're aware?" Patricia Okonkwo interjected. "These allegations, even if true, would constitute individual misconduct rather than corporate policy." "Respectfully, that's bullshit," Tanya Marshall cut in. "I've compiled passenger accounts from over 30 flights in the past month alone, all with similar patterns. Black passengers with identical status levels to their white counterparts were denied upgrades at 8 times the rate." Rachel Coleman added, "And I've spoken with 5 former Skymark employees in the past hour who confirmed they were trained to prioritize certain passenger profiles for premium cabin placement." The tension in the room was palpable as Wilson rubbed his temples. "Miss Okonkwo, I think we need to change our approach here." The attorney looked uncomfortable but nodded. Wilson turned to Jasmine and Devin. "I want to be very clear. If what you're presenting is accurate, it represents a profound violation of everything I've worked for during my 20-year career with this airline. I need time to investigate properly, but I won't insult your intelligence by denying the pattern you've identified." Captain Pierce, who had been silent until now, spoke up. While this discussion continues, I have 4 other captains requesting guidance on whether to continue their flights. The situation is spreading across our network. Wilson checked his phone and grimaced.
It's worse than that. We now have 6 aircraft effectively grounded by crew concerns, and our social media monitoring shows numbers Skymark discrimination trending nationally.
As if on cue, Thompson's phone rang. He answered, listening briefly before his face paled. "Sir, yes, he's here with me. I understand. Right away." He ended the call and turned to Wilson. "That was Lawrence Bradford. He's on his way. The board called an emergency session." "The CEO is coming here?" Wilson asked, clearly surprised. His exact words were, "I'm not letting this company become the next United dragging incident. He'll be landing in 30 minutes by corporate jet." Devon raised an eyebrow. "It seems the stakes have escalated considerably." While we wait for Mr. Bradford, Jasmine said, "I think we should discuss what accountability actually looks like. Token apologies and superficial diversity training won't address systemic issues." Wilson nodded slowly. "You're right. What would you propose?" "First, a third-party audit of all passenger treatment metrics, with full transparency regarding the findings," Jasmine began. "Second, a comprehensive review of algorithms and policies that impact passenger assignments. Third, meaningful consequences for employees who implemented discriminatory practices regardless of their level in the organization. And fourth," Tanya added, "a substantial compensation fund for passengers who have been subjected to discriminatory treatment in the past." Patricia Okonkwo winced visibly. The financial implications of such measures would be far less costly than the class action lawsuit we're prepared to file. Devon finished for her. Not to mention the ongoing PR disaster and DOT investigation that would follow. The door opened, and a young staff member entered nervously. "Mr. Wilson, the FAA Regional Director, is on line 2. They're requesting information about the grounded flights and asking if there's a safety concern they should be aware of." Wilson closed his eyes briefly. "Tell him I'll call back in 5 minutes." After the staff member left, he turned to the group. "This has escalated beyond a customer service issue. We're now dealing with potential regulatory intervention." "That's because it was never just a customer service issue," Jasmine pointed out. "Civil rights violations have regulatory implications by definition." The next 40 minutes brought a flurry of activity, as more Skymark executives joined remotely via conference call. Former employees continued reaching out to Rachel and Tanya, providing increasingly damning testimonies about unofficial company practices. Devon coordinated with colleagues who were preparing the framework for a class action complaint. Captain Pierce returned from checking on his crew to report that the number of affected flights had risen to 11, with pilots across the country expressing solidarity and refusing to depart until the situation was addressed. Finally, the door opened to reveal Lawrence Bradford, Skymark's CEO, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested he rarely encountered problems he couldn't immediately solve. "Wilson, what the hell is happening to my airline?" he demanded without preamble. Samuel Wilson stood. "Lawrence, we have a serious situation involving documented patterns of discriminatory treatment of passengers." Bradford's eyes swept the room, landing on Jasmine. "You must be Miss Washington. I understand you're an attorney." "That's correct," Jasmine replied calmly. "Partner at Anderson & Mitchell, specializing in corporate compliance and civil rights law." A flicker of recognition passed across Bradford's face at the mention of her firm. "I see. And what exactly are you looking to achieve here, Miss Washington?" "Systemic change, Mr. Bradford. Not just for me, but for every passenger who has been subjected to discriminatory treatment while using your airline." Bradford pulled up a chair. "Wilson, give me a concise summary of what we're dealing with." For the next 10 minutes, Wilson outlined the situation, from Reynolds' actions to the mounting evidence of systematic discrimination throughout the company. As he spoke, Bradford's expression shifted from irritation to concern, and finally to something approaching alarm. When Wilson finished, Bradford turned to Devon. "What kind of time frame are we looking at for the class action filing?" "We could have it ready by tomorrow morning," Devon replied. "But we're open to discussing alternatives that would provide genuine accountability and remediation." Bradford nodded slowly. "I've been in this industry for 30 years, Mr. Williams. I've navigated fuel crises, terrorist attacks, and economic collapses, but I've never faced anything quite like this." He turned to Jasmine. "You've effectively grounded a significant portion of my fleet with a single question about your Harvard law degree and the color of your skin. That's impressive." "It wasn't my intention to disrupt your operations, Mr. Bradford," Jasmine replied. "It was my intention to be treated with the same dignity and respect afforded to white passengers." Bradford held her gaze for a long moment. "Fair enough. So let's talk solutions." As the discussion continued, Bradford revealed himself to be shrewder than his initial bluster suggested. He asked penetrating questions about the evidence, consulted privately with Patricia Okonkwo, and finally turned to Jasmine with an offer. "Miss Washington, I'm prepared to authorize a comprehensive third-party audit of our passenger treatment metrics with full public disclosure of the findings. We'll establish an independent oversight committee for policy review with seats reserved for civil rights advocates. And we'll create a substantial compensation fund for affected passengers administered by a neutral third party." Devon leaned forward. "And Mr. Reynolds, terminated effective immediately, along with any other employees found to have engaged in similar conduct," Bradford stated. "And before you ask, yes, that includes executive leadership if the evidence warrants it." Jasmine considered the offer. "What about structural changes to prevent this from happening again? Complete overhaul of our seating algorithms and upgrade procedures with transparent criteria that eliminate subjective discretion. Mandatory civil rights training for all customer-facing staff, developed in Devlet, Prague. Consultation with experts in the field." Bradford paused. "And I'd like to offer you a position on a newly formed ethics advisory board with actual authority to review and recommend changes to company practices." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Jasmine's response. "Mr. Bradford, those terms form a solid foundation," she finally said. "But I'll need everything in writing with specific timelines, metrics for success, and enforceable consequences for non-compliance." Bradford nodded. "Reasonable. Miss Okonkwo will work with your team to draft the agreement immediately." He checked his watch. "In the meantime, we have thousands of passengers stranded across our network. How do we resolve that?" Jasmine turned to Devon, who nodded slightly. "Once we have the signed agreement with Mr. Wilson's and your personal guarantees of implementation, we'll consider the immediate issue resolved. Your flights can proceed." "And the social media campaign?" Bradford asked, glancing at Tanya. "That depends on your public response," Tanya replied. "Hollow corporate speak won't cut it. People need to see real accountability." Bradford took a deep breath. "Then I suppose I need to draft a statement that acknowledges the truth, doesn't it?" For the first time since the ordeal began, Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. "Yes, Mr. Bradford, I believe you do." The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the Skymark conference room as Lawrence Bradford paced before a whiteboard filled with hastily scrawled talking points. 6 hours had passed since Jasmine Washington had first been denied her rightful seat, and the situation had evolved from a single incident into a full-blown corporate crisis. "Our legal team has concerns about admitting liability in a public statement," Patricia Okonkwo insisted, tapping her pen against a draft document. "We can acknowledge the concerns raised without confirming discriminatory practices." Bradford stopped pacing. "Patricia, we're well beyond that point. 11 aircraft grounded number Skymark discrimination trending nationwide and CNN running hourly updates. We need to get ahead of this." "I agree with Mr. Bradford," Samuel Wilson added, surprising the attorney. Transparency is our only viable path forward. Jasmine, who had been quietly conferring with Devin Williams, looked up. Mr. Bradford, I appreciate your willingness to address this publicly, but I'm concerned about the language in paragraph 3 of your proposed statement, which characterizes these incidents as misunderstandings rather than systematic discrimination. Bradford sighed heavily. Miss Washington, you have to understand the position I'm in. Every word in this statement has potential legal implications worth millions. I understand completely, Jasmine replied evenly. And you need to understand that half measures won't resolve this crisis. The truth has a way of emerging regardless of how carefully it's managed. Devin nodded. Our firm has already been contacted by 28 additional Skymark passengers reporting similar experiences. This story is going to continue growing, whether you address it honestly or not. The tension in the room was palpable when Bradford's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. The board chair, he muttered, before stepping into the hallway to take the call. Rachel Coleman, who had been documenting the negotiations while honoring the temporary embargo on publishing, leaned toward Jasmine. He's feeling the pressure. The stock has dropped 8% since trading opened after the first news reports. It's not about the stock price, Jasmine replied. It's about doing what's right. For some of us, Tanya Marshall added. For Bradford and the board, it's absolutely about the stock price. Bradford returned his expression grim. The board wants this resolved immediately. They've authorized me to offer a substantially increased settlement fund in exchange for confidentiality agreements. Devin shook his head. That's not going to work, Mr. Bradford. Our clients aren't looking for hush money. It's not hush money, Bradford insisted. It's compensation for a legitimate grievance with standard confidentiality provisions. Jasmine stood, gathering her notes deliberately. Mr. Bradford, let me be absolutely clear. This isn't about money. It's about dignity. It's about ensuring that no other passenger has to experience what I and countless others have endured. She walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. If you want to resolve this crisis today, here are our non-negotiable terms. She wrote 4 bullet points. 1. Public acknowledgement of discriminatory practices. 2. Transparent, verifiable systemic changes. 3. Accountability for responsible parties at ALL levels. 4. No confidentiality agreements. These are the foundations of any resolution, she continued. Without them, we proceed with the class action filing tomorrow morning. Bradford's face flushed. That sounds suspiciously like an ultimatum, Miss Washington. It's not an ultimatum, she corrected him. It's clarity about what meaningful accountability looks like. The choice remains yours. Captain Pierce, who had been monitoring the situation at the gates, entered the conference room with a fresh update. 6 more flights have been affected. We now have 17 aircraft grounded across the network, with pilots in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta joining in solidarity. Bradford rubbed his temples. How bad is the financial impact? Thompson consulted his tablet. We're approaching $3 million in losses per hour, factoring in crew overtime, passenger compensation, and rebookings with competitor airlines. Jesus Christ, Bradford muttered. Jasmine's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, then looked up at Bradford. CNN is reporting that the Department of Transportation has opened a formal investigation into discriminatory practices at Skymark. The color drained from Bradford's face as Samuel Wilson pulled up the DOT press release on his laptop and turned the screen toward the CEO. The announcement confirmed the investigation and mentioned potential civil penalties. This has gone far enough, Bradford declared abruptly. Miss Washington, I accept your terms. Patricia, draft a statement acknowledging the discrimination and outlining our commitments to reform. Patricia looked alarmed. Lawrence, the board hasn't. I'll deal with the board, he cut her off. This is now about the survival of the company. Devon raised a cautionary hand. Mr. Bradford, while we appreciate this change in position, we'll need more than verbal assurances. We require a legally binding agreement with specific commitments, timelines, and enforcement mechanisms. Fine, Bradford snapped. How quickly can we put that together? My team has already prepared a draft framework, Devon replied, sliding a document across the table. We anticipated this outcome. Bradford scanned the document, his expression hardening at certain points, but he eventually nodded. We can work with this as a starting point. As the legal teams began negotiating the details, Bradford approached Jasmine privately. Miss Washington, may I speak with you for a moment? They stepped into a corner of the room slightly apart from the others. I want to know what this is really about for you, Bradford said quietly. You could have accepted the upgrade and vouchers this morning and been on your way to San Francisco. Instead, you've brought a major airline to its knees. What's your end game? Jasmine met his gaze steadily. My end game, as you put it, is simple. I want my nieces and nephews to live in a world where they don't have to be twice as good to get half as far, where they aren't automatically presumed to be in the wrong place when they occupy spaces of privilege, where their dignity isn't considered a negotiable concession. Bradford was silent for a moment. You know, I built this airline from a regional carrier with 7 planes to a global network. I've always prided myself on running a meritocracy. The problem with declared meritocracies, Jasmine replied, is that they often reinforce existing power structures while claiming to transcend them. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Bradford's face. That's not something I've considered. Perhaps that's part of the problem. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the door. A security guard appeared escorting Gregory Reynolds, who looked disheveled and angry. Sir Mr. Reynolds insisted on speaking with you directly, the guard explained to Bradford. He says he's being unfairly scapegoated. Bradford's jaw tightened. Let him in. Reynolds straightened his uniform as he entered, his eyes darting around the room before settling on Bradford. Mr. Bradford, thank you for seeing me. I need to explain what really happened. Mr. Reynolds, Bradford interrupted. I've seen enough evidence to make my decision. Your employment with Skymark has been terminated, effective immediately. Reynolds' face flushed dark red. You're firing me for following unwritten company policies that everyone knows about. The room fell silent, all eyes now on Reynolds. What exactly do you mean by unwritten company policies? Devon asked, his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp. Reynolds seemed to suddenly realize his precarious position. I just mean there are expectations about maintaining a certain atmosphere in the premium cabins. And who communicated these expectations to you? Jasmine asked. Reynolds hesitated, glancing at Thompson, who had gone very still. It was made clear during training that discretion should be used to ensure passenger comfort and satisfaction. Discretion, based on what criteria specifically? Devon pressed. Reynolds swallowed hard. Listen, I'm not taking the fall alone here. Everyone from gate agents to executive leadership understands how this works. We all know the profile of passengers who generate complaints when seated in premium cabins. Bradford's expression had transformed from anger to something closer to alarm. Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you stop talking now. Why, so you can pretend you didn't know? Reynolds shot back, his professional demeanor entirely abandoned. Check your emails, Mr. Bradford. 3 years ago, you responded to a quarterly customer satisfaction report by asking why premium cabin complaints were rising. The response you received specifically mentioned passenger profile adjustments as the solution, and you approved it. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jasmine and Devon exchanged glances, while Tanya Marshall discreetly activated the voice recorder on her phone. Bradford's face had gone ashen. That's a serious mischaracterization. Is it? Reynolds challenged. Because I have the email thread. I kept copies of everything after the Johnson incident last year, when another black passenger complained, and I was told to handle it without documentation. Samuel Wilson stepped forward. Lawrence, if what he's saying is true— Bradford held up a hand, his expression now carefully controlled. This conversation needs to happen with counsel present. Mr. Reynolds, you are still terminated, and I remind you of your confidentiality obligations under your employment contract. Confidentiality doesn't cover illegal discrimination, Devon pointed out mildly. As security escorted a protesting Reynolds from the room, the power dynamic had shifted dramatically. Bradford was no longer negotiating from a position of authority, but from one of vulnerability. Jasmine gathered her belongings. I think we need a brief recess while Mr. Bradford consults with his team. Devon, Tanya, Rachel, shall we get some coffee? As they left the conference room, Bradford could be heard urgently whispering with Patricia Okonkwo about damage control and board liability. In the corridor, Devon turned to Jasmine with newfound admiration. You predicted this would happen, didn't you? That's why you insisted on Reynolds being in the room. I suspected there was more to the story, Jasmine acknowledged. Discrimination this systematic is rarely the work of a single employee. It required institutional support, whether explicit or implicit. Tanya checked her phone. The story just got bigger. Reuters is reporting that the FAA is considering an emergency audit of Skymark's compliance practices, citing concerns about corporate culture affecting operational safety. Rachel nodded grimly. And the hashtag has evolved. It's now number ground Skymark, with calls for passengers to boycott the airline until reforms are verified by independent auditors. Jasmine considered this information as they walked toward the terminal cafe. Bradford is going to offer a massive settlement to make this go away quietly. And Devon asked. And we're going to decline, Jasmine replied firmly. Some problems can't be solved with money alone. This is about changing a culture of discrimination that has become so normalized that even the CEO didn't recognize his own complicity. They ordered coffee and found a table near the windows overlooking the tarmac where 6 Skymark aircraft sat immobile, powerful symbols of an industry forced to confront its failures. In the distance, more planes bore the distinctive Skymark livery, grounded by pilots who had taken a stand for principle over profit. Jasmine's phone rang her client in San Francisco, wondering about her delayed arrival. I'm afraid I won't make today's meeting, she explained. Something more urgent has come up. She ended the call and gazed out at the grounded fleet, thinking of all the passengers who had suffered silent indignities, who had doubted themselves rather than the system that discriminated against them. Today, that system had been forced into the light. When they returned to the conference room 30 minutes later, Bradford was waiting with a new proposal. The opening line told Jasmine everything she needed to know about the shift in power. Skymark Airlines acknowledges its responsibility for systematic discriminatory practices and commits to comprehensive, transparent reform. The standoff had reached its turning point. The atmosphere in the Skymark boardroom was electric, with tension as 12 board members joined the emergency meeting via secure video conference. Lawrence Bradford sat alone at the head of the conference table, his usual commanding presence diminished by the extraordinary circumstances. Lawrence, the stock has fallen 15% since this morning. Victoria Chen, the board chair, stated bluntly from the primary screen. Institutional investors are calling for explanations. What exactly are we dealing with? Bradford cleared his throat. A systematic pattern of discriminatory practices that appears to have been implemented throughout our passenger service operations. The evidence is substantial. How substantial? Asked Richard Michaels, the audit committee chair. Enough that both the Department of Transportation and the FAA have opened formal investigations, Bradford replied. And enough that we currently have 23 aircraft grounded across our network as pilots refuse to operate flights until we address the situation. A stunned silence followed this revelation. How did this happen without our knowledge? Chen finally asked. Bradford hesitated. The discriminatory practices were implemented through informal channels using coded language like passenger profile optimization and cabin atmosphere management. The algorithms and training materials never explicitly mentioned race, but the effect was clear. And the class action lawsuit Michaels pressed. Miss Washington and her legal team have prepared a filing with multiple plaintiffs. They've agreed to postpone it pending our acceptance of their terms. Chen leaned forward. Which are? Bradford outlined the 4 non-negotiable points Jasmine had presented, along with the more detailed terms Devin Williams had drafted. Public acknowledgement of discriminatory practices, board member James Wilson exclaimed. That's corporate suicide. It's also the truth, Bradford replied quietly. And at this point, denying it would only compound the damage. Have you considered that this Washington woman might be extorting? The company asked Howard Grant, the most conservative board member. Bradford shook his head. I've spent hours with her today. She's not interested in personal gain. She's a highly respected attorney with a clear moral compass and the legal leverage to force systemic change. What's your recommendation? Lawrence Chen asked after a long pause. Bradford straightened in his chair. I recommend we accept the terms and embrace radical transparency. We acknowledge what happened. We take our medicine and we commit to becoming the industry leader in equitable treatment of all passengers. The board debate was heated and prolonged. Several members argued for fighting the allegations through legal channels, while others insisted on attempting to negotiate confidentiality provisions. But as reports continued to arrive about the expanding operational disruption and plummeting stock price, even the most resistant directors began to reconsider. The projected financial impact of continued resistance is unsustainable, the CFO reported grimly. We're approaching $8 million in losses from today alone, with projections exceeding $50 million by this time tomorrow if the situation continues. After nearly 2 hours of debate, the board voted 9-3 to accept the terms authorizing Bradford to execute the agreement. When he returned to the conference room where Jasmine and her team waited, Bradford's demeanor had changed. The corporate bravado was gone, replaced by the sobered recognition of a leader facing his company's moral failure. The board has approved the terms, he announced. We're prepared to move forward with the agreement as drafted. Devin reviewed the final document with Jasmine. It contained everything they had demanded. 1. A public statement acknowledging systematic discriminatory practices and apologizing to affected passengers. 2. The establishment of an independent ethics board with binding authority over passenger treatment policies. 3. A third-party audit of all algorithms and procedures affecting passenger assignments. 4. Mandatory comprehensive civil rights training for all customer-facing employees. 5. A $50 million compensation fund for affected passengers. 6. Termination of all employees found to have knowingly implemented discriminatory practices regardless of rank. 7. Regular public reporting on reform progress. One addition, Jasmine noted. We want the ethics board to include representatives from civil rights organizations, not just corporate appointees. Bradford nodded without hesitation. Agreed. As the legal teams finalized the documentation, Bradford faced the challenging task of crafting his public statement. Multiple drafts were rejected by Jasmine and Devin for using euphemisms or attempting to minimize the company's culpability. Mr. Bradford Jasmine finally said, speak plainly and honestly. Acknowledge the harm, take responsibility, and commit to genuine change. The public will recognize authenticity. After several more attempts, Bradford produced a statement that satisfied everyone. Today, Skymark Airlines acknowledges that we have failed in our duty to treat all passengers with equal dignity and respect. We have discovered patterns of systematic discrimination in our seating policies and procedures that have disproportionately impacted Black passengers and other people of color. This discrimination was wrong, and we take full responsibility for the harm it has caused. Effective immediately, we are implementing comprehensive reforms to address these failures at every level of our organization. We have terminated employees who implemented these discriminatory practices, and we will continue to hold accountable any individual who violated our passengers' civil rights, regardless of their position in the company. We cannot undo the harm that has been caused, but we can and will make it right through concrete actions, transparent reporting, and sustained commitment to equitable treatment for all passengers. We invite independent scrutiny of our reforms and welcome the opportunity to rebuild trust through actions rather than words. The statement was scheduled for release at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time to be followed by Bradford's appearance on national news programs the following morning. Meanwhile, the operational crisis continued to grow. By late afternoon, 32 Skymark aircraft sat idle across the country as pilots cited safety concerns related to corporate culture affecting operational decisions, language that gave them protection under FAA regulations. The turning point came when Captain Pierce gathered the pilots and flight attendants from the original Flight 1372 inches, the crew lounge. Jasmine had been invited to address them directly. "I want to thank each of you for the courage you've shown today," she began. "By refusing to participate in a system that discriminates, you've demonstrated true leadership." She outlined the agreement that had been reached, emphasizing the concrete changes it would implement. "The question now is whether you believe these commitments are sufficient to resume operations," she concluded. "That decision belongs to you, not me." Captain Pierce consulted with his crew and then contacted other grounded flight teams across the network. Within the hour, he returned with their collective decision. "Miss Washington, we believe the agreement represents a genuine commitment to change. We're prepared to resume operations once the public statement has been released and the agreement formally executed." By 8:30 p.m., with the statement published and the agreement signed, the first Skymark flight departed Reagan National Flight 1372 to San Francisco with Jasmine Washington seated in 2C, her original first class assignment. As the aircraft climbed into the evening sky, Jasmine reflected on the day's extraordinary events. What had begun as a routine business trip had transformed into a nationwide reckoning with discrimination that had long been hidden in plain sight. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw you on the news, baby girl. So proud I could burst. Your daddy would have loved to see this day." Jasmine smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. For once, the system had been forced to bend toward justice rather than away from it. It wasn't a total victory, those rarely existed in civil rights work, but it was a significant step forward. As the flight attendant offered her a glass of champagne, Jasmine noticed something unusual. 3 other black passengers seated in first class, all of whom had been on the original flight that morning. They exchanged knowing glances, a silent acknowledgement of the battle they had witnessed and the change it had begun. The reckoning wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for tonight, Jasmine allowed herself to savor the knowledge that sometimes one person's refusal to accept injustice could ripple outward, changing not just their own circumstances, but the system itself. 6 months after Jasmine Washington's standoff with Skymark Airlines, she stood at the podium in the company's newly renovated headquarters, addressing the inaugural meeting of the Ethics Advisory Board. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the diverse group of executives, civil rights advocates, and industry experts assembled before her. "When I boarded that flight 6 months ago, I could never have imagined standing here today," Jasmine began. But transformation often begins in unexpected moments, when someone simply refuses to accept what has always been accepted before. The Ethics Advisory Board, born from the agreement Jasmine had negotiated, possessed unprecedented authority for an oversight body. Its 9 members, 5 independent civil rights experts, and 4 Skymark representatives had binding power over passenger treatment policies, with the ability to audit practices and mandate changes. Jasmine herself had initially declined a position on the board, concerned about conflicts of interest given her role in the class action settlement. But after careful consideration, she had accepted the chairperson role 3 months ago, taking a sabbatical from Anderson and Mitchell to focus on implementing meaningful reforms. Our first quarterly report will be published next week, she continued, gesturing to the document before each board member. The data shows significant progress, though we still have considerable work ahead. The report detailed the results of the independent audit conducted by the Civil Rights Division of a prominent consulting firm. It revealed what many had suspected but few had been able to prove. Black passengers had been downgraded from premium cabins at 8 times the rate of white passengers with identical status levels. Asian and Hispanic passengers had faced similar, though less severe, discrimination. More damning was the discovery of an internal metric called Cabin Harmony Index, which had been used to train gate agents to make discretionary adjustments based on passenger demographics, a thinly veiled proxy for racial profiling. The fallout had been substantial. Beyond Gregory Reynolds, 17 employees had been terminated for implementing discriminatory practices, including 3 vice presidents and the former head of customer experience. Lawrence Bradford had resigned as CEO 3 months after the incident, though he had surprised many by accepting a position as a special advisor to the Ethics Board, where he now worked to dismantle the very systems he had tacitly allowed to flourish. The transparent booking and upgrade algorithms we implemented last quarter have already shown results. Jasmine noted, turning to a slide that displayed the data. Premium cabin demographics now closely match our overall passenger demographics, with no adverse effects on customer satisfaction scores. In fact, those scores have improved by 12%. Samuel Wilson, who had been appointed interim CEO after Bradford's departure, nodded in agreement. The fears that transparency would somehow diminish the premium experience have proven entirely unfounded. Our first-class revenue is up 7% year over year. The transformation extended beyond Skymark's walls. The Department of Transportation, galvanized by the case, had launched industry-wide investigations into seating algorithms and upgrade practices. 3 other major airlines had proactively announced reforms to their own systems, hoping to avoid Skymark's public relations nightmare. Congressional hearings on discriminatory practices in the transportation industry had led to proposed legislation strengthening disclosure requirements for passenger treatment metrics. The bill, co-sponsored by representatives from both parties, was expected to pass later that year. After the board meeting concluded, Jasmine found herself in conversation with Rachel Coleman, whose reporting on the incident had earned her a Pulitzer nomination. "Your latest article really captured the systemic nature of the problem," Jasmine noted. "I appreciate how you've continued to follow the story beyond the initial incident." Rachel smiled. "It's been fascinating to document. You know, when we first met on that flight, I never expected we'd end up working together like this." The 2 women had developed a powerful alliance in the months since the incident. Rachel's investigative series on airline discrimination had uncovered similar patterns across the industry, while Jasmine's legal expertise had helped translate those findings into actionable reforms. As they walked toward the executive elevator, they passed a wall display that had once featured generic stock photos of smiling passengers. It now showcased Skymark's new advertisement campaign, real passengers of all backgrounds enjoying equal treatment in premium cabins. The tagline read simply, "Your dignity is our priority." Outside in the parking lot, Jasmine spotted a familiar face, Captain Franklin Pierce, now Skymark's Director of Flight Operations. "Miss Washington," he called, approaching with an extended hand. "I wanted to thank you for your presentation today. The operational improvements have been remarkable. Crew morale is the highest I've seen in 15 years with the company." "That's good to hear," Jasmine replied, shaking his hand. "How are the new training protocols being received?" "Better than expected," Pierce admitted. "There was initial resistance, but when pilots and flight attendants saw the data, most recognized the problem. The few who couldn't adapt have moved on. As Pierce headed toward the building, Jasmine's phone rang. The caller ID showed Lawrence Bradford. Miss Washington Bradford began his voice holding none of the corporate authority it had carried 6 months ago. I've been reviewing the quarterly report. The numbers are encouraging. They are, Jasmine agreed, though we still have work to do on the regional routes. Agreed. I've actually prepared some recommendations based on my experience with the smaller carriers. May I send them over for your consideration? Jasmine felt a momentary amazement at the transformation. The man who had initially threatened her with legal action was now asking permission to contribute ideas. Of course, Mr. Bradford. I value your insights. After ending the call, Jasmine checked her calendar. She had a mentoring session scheduled that afternoon with Zara Johnson, a young black law student who had reached out after seeing Jasmine on national news. Zara was one of dozens of young people inspired by the Skymark case to pursue careers in civil rights advocacy. The mentoring program had been an unexpected outgrowth of the incident. What began as informal advice sessions had evolved into a structured initiative connecting experienced advocates with aspiring changemakers, particularly young women of color seeking to enter fields where they remained underrepresented. Later that afternoon, Jasmine met Zara at a cafe near Howard University's law school, Jasmine's alma mater. The young woman arrived with a notebook full of questions about corporate accountability strategies. The thing I still don't understand, Zara said after they had discussed legal approaches for nearly an hour, is how you found the courage to take that stand in the first place. Weren't you afraid of the consequences? Jasmine considered the question carefully. I was concerned about potential repercussions, she acknowledged. But I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important than that fear. In that moment, my dignity and the dignity of others like me mattered more than the discomfort of confrontation. Zara nodded thoughtfully. I hope I can find that kind of clarity when my moment comes. You will, Jasmine assured her. Just remember that change rarely happens in grand dramatic gestures. It happens in small moments of refusing to accept what should be unacceptable, of asking questions that demand answers. As they parted ways, Jasmine headed to Reagan National for her flight back to Baltimore. Walking through the terminal, she noticed subtle but significant differences from 6 months earlier. Gate agents interacted with passengers of all backgrounds with equal courtesy. The first-class lounge hosted a visibly diverse clientele, and at the Skymark counter, a prominent display announced, "All passengers deserve equal dignity and respect." If you experience or witness discrimination, contact our ethics hotline immediately. Boarding her flight, Jasmine was greeted by a flight attendant who showed no surprise at her first-class boarding pass. In her seat was a small envelope containing a handwritten note from the crew. Thank you for making our industry better for everyone. As the aircraft lifted into the evening sky, Jasmine reflected on how far things had come. The airline industry had been fundamentally changed because one woman had refused to accept injustice. Not through violence or extreme measures, but through calm persistence and the unwavering belief that dignity was not negotiable. The transformation wasn't complete. Systemic change never happened overnight. But the arc had bent toward justice, if only because someone had been brave enough to apply pressure at exactly the right point. What started with a single question, "Does my Harvard law degree make my skin any lighter?" had sparked a movement that continued to grow, reminding the world that the most powerful force for change was often the simple refusal to accept what should be unacceptable. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and stood up against it? How did you handle the situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story inspiring, please like and subscribe to hear more accounts of everyday heroes creating extraordinary change. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to be reminded of their own power to make a difference. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, one person with courage can transform an entire system. Jasmine Washington's story teaches us that true change often begins with one person refusing to accept injustice. Her calm persistence in the face of discrimination demonstrates that courage isn't about grand gestures, but about standing firm when it would be easier to back down. The transformation of Skymark Airlines shows how systemic problems require systemic solutions, not just individual consequences, but structural changes that prevent future harm. This story reminds us that discrimination persists not because of a few bad apples, but because systems tacitly permit it through coded language, informal practices, and institutional silence. Real accountability must include transparency, independent oversight, and concrete reforms that can be verified. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine's journey illustrates the ripple effect of courage. When one person stands up, others find their voice. Her actions inspired pilots, other passengers, and eventually an entire industry to confront uncomfortable truths and demand better. Change rarely comes from the top down. It rises from individuals who decide that dignity is non-negotiable. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and found the courage to speak up? Or perhaps remained silent and later wished you hadn't? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might give someone else the strength they need to stand up next time. If this account of everyday courage inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one voice can transform an entire system. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, justice often begins with a single question that demands an answer.